Welcome back to Guff Stuff Weekly. I'm Guff.
I'm Javan.
And this week we are delving into a different subject. We've been a lot of games, a lot of stuff. I think this time we're going to talk about 3D printing. And in the game world, what does it pertain to?
Oh my
the different
God,
aspects.
we're back to the hobby space?
Yeah, we haven't done the hobby one for a while, so I think it's time. You've had a little experience in it now. I've had a considerable amount of experience in the FDM printing. But you've done some resin printing, so here we go.
Yeah, let's do a little backstory, I guess.
Yep.
How long ago did you start working with FDM printing?
I started before the pandemic, so back in 2019, I think, was when I bought my Creative CR5. It was their first Kickstarter they did. CR6 SE, sorry, from Creality.
Yeah.
Good Lord of my brain. And I fell pretty much in love with 3D printing at that point. Yeah. And then I bought my Anycubic resin printer right after that.
Yeah, so I was very hesitant to get into 3D printing.
Right.
Because basically the only thing I wanted out of it was like miniatures.
Yep.
And I probably could have gotten into FDM for like printing terrain and stuff.
Right.
But at the end of the day, I was just like, like it's not that good at the time.
Right.
Because I had looked into it in like 2017,
right?
Like when I first had moved,
right?
And I'm like, yeah, this seems interesting. And then I didn't really think about it for like 6 years.
Yeah. No, right? Yeah, no, yeah, same thing. I actually got so history-wise, I actually have a laser etcher that I got from my father-in-law many years ago. Probably, gosh, I don't remember. It was long. It was probably around 2016, 2017 when they first started coming out. It was a kit.
Yeah.
You had to build it. And it was L.A.G.S maker was one of the first people that built kits for consumers, at least in the States. Obviously, in other parts of the world, they've been doing it for a while. But I never did get that running. Never really, because you had to hook it up to an Arduino, and I just didn't want to get into the coding aspect of it.
Mm-hmm.
And
yeah,
then,
because you need to like learn like CAD.
Yeah, and so that kind of turned me away from it right away.
Yeah.
Like I didn't want to be. I'm not that hard into this hobby that I want to learn all the coding and all the crap that goes into making every servo motor work the way you want it to. And so I'm just like, I think I'm going to skip it until Creality popped up, a Kickstarter going, hey, you don't have to learn none of this. It's all built in, self-bed leveling, all that stuff. It was their first printer to have all of it. Heated beds, self-leveling. I'm like, I don't have to learn how to code? Like, nope. All right, done.
Yeah, and like, so for me, in high school, we actually had a pretty good program for learning, like CAD software and,
I remember that.
Like running like auto lathes and stuff like that. Oh. Yeah, I didn't take any of that. I probably should have.
In high school, we had typewriters.
Yeah.
We did have computers my last 2 years, though. We had the Mac.
Well, I mean, our tech department in our school was funded by the factory.
Oh, yeah.
That was like they had all the injection molders for plastic and like welding shop and all that stuff. They basically like the factory's like, hey, we do a lot of literal fabrication and machining and stuff like that. Let's put it into the shop classes at the high school and teach people something worth actually learning.
Right.
And there's so many kids that I graduated with and even afterwards that literally learned so much in the high school classes that they could go to like a machine shop, like a metal shop, run the lathes, and like didn't need any schooling or nothing. Like they just knew it out of high school.
Right, that would be nice. Yeah, I never got it.
Okay, so to kind of move forward a little bit here, that's kind of where we were at in like 2015, 2016.
Right,
was like you could build stuff out of MDF and kind of engineer your own servo motors, or buy these kits, but you still needed like the fundamental framework of knowing how to run like 3D modeling software and all of that. Then comes along like this Creality thing, like you said, and now all of a sudden the hardware side of it is accessible. Because you don't need to have a micrometer and make sure that your bed is level, and you can kind of just like plug and play more or less.
Yeah, it's a lot of plug and play. There's a little bit of tweaking, but that's not hard. It's the whole micrometer thing and the whole everything had to be perfect for it to work perfectly.
Yeah, because you have to work within tolerances. So I actually worked in a machine shop for quite a while, about a little over a year, maybe 2 years. And, going on that side of things, having to like program in 3 dimensions, how to bend something or how to put something on a lathe and make sure that it takes off what you want.
Right.
The idea of taking a nozzle and melting something
Right.
in a circle to make a sphere, and you get closer and closer.
Right.
Way easier than taking a big chunk of something and taking away.
Right.
Turns out that whole idea of just adding material to make something from scratch is much easier than starting with something and trying to work with the limitations of hollowing it out and carving it. A little bit technical, but it's a big, important step into where we are now.
Yep.
And now they've come out with essentially 3D object files.
Tons of them.
Or STLs.
Yep.
I don't even know what STL actually stands for.
Oh, I know what it stands for, but my brain's not gonna.
Standard template.
No.
Something.
No.
Maybe Gamer Joe will look it up for us.
That would be good. Can Gamer Joe look it up on his iPhone? Oh, sorry, Gamer Joe.
Anyway, so we'll keep it rolling here, but yeah, that whole ease of use and the it's kind of like as technology advances, it's like the cell phones when each one had a different charger. Well, now there's 2 chargers?
Yeah.
It is a standard template library.
Okay, yeah, there we go. Yeah, you were pretty close.
I remember seeing it once.
It wasn't complicated. G-code's a little different.
Long story short, all it is it's a 3D map, 3D image.
Yep. Yeah, and it can be used on printers. It can be used in like vinyl cutters. It's pretty much the same code.
Yeah, it's a universal kind of.
The STL code is.
Yeah, and this was awesome because now all of a sudden, someone like me who doesn't have CAD software background or 3D modeling background, I can just plug in a USB or download a file. That's probably more likely. Download a file from these tons of repository websites.
Right.
That some you can pay, some you don't have to pay. Yeah. I generally pay for my STLs because you typically get a better quality.
Right.
Unless it's something super niche that I only need once, then maybe I'll look or maybe try to slap something together.
Yep.
But yeah, so now we have these things called slicers, which are essentially these universal. You plug in the file or you upload the file into the slicer.
Yep. Turns into a code made for your printer.
And it turns it into. It basically translates it.
Yep.
And now all of a sudden the ease of use is like crazy good because you can hollow out the object, you can add supports, and you don't have to like program any of it. It's all the user interface and the GUI is all there for you.
Yeah, and it gets simpler every new release of every new software. It just makes it simpler and simpler and simpler.
Yeah, and like the one that I use right now, you can actually go between FDM and resin.
Yep. Like
you could take the same STL and like go back and forth between, and it'll recode it for you.
Yeah, I know. I just was setting some STLs up setting up some code last night or files last night, and for my printer, and I noticed that the new update they gave me 3 choices now that I can either have a balanced setup where its integrity of the model is balanced compared to the visual, which means how nice it looks, how smooth everything looks,
how thin the lines are.
Or you can go to visual, so the printer focuses on making everything look perfect and less about the integrity inside the model, which you can counteract with adding. Making the infill more heavy and all that stuff.
Yep, the lattice.
Or you can have the engineer side where it's just pure durability, doesn't give a crap about how it looks. As long as there's a layer on the outside that's done.
And honestly, so
it's really cool.
I think we could step forward even a little bit here now, maybe talk about some of our own experiences with this. I'll go ahead and start since mine is a little fresher in my mind, I guess. Since we just had some prints of mine today. So when I first started printing, I was getting like decent quality.
Right.
And I was printing at like about a 0.04 or 0.05 millimeter, which for resin, that's about what you're usually printing at.
Right.
But I found that if I could dial down the layer size, I could all of a sudden dial down maybe I'm getting ahead of myself here. I kind of want to explain how a printer works.
Okay.
I feel like that's fair. I don't want to get too far ahead of myself here because some people might not know any of this.
Right.
And I kind of take that for granted. So the way that why don't you explain how an FDM printer works, and I'll do the resin printer.
Well, the FDM printer is very, very simple in its base function. You literally, like you said, have a nozzle. You put a filament. It can be any kind of filament. You can print printers that'll print anything out there. There's printers that take metal powder and print metal powder.
There's cement ones too.
Yeah, they build houses out of them. But its basic function is to take something, heat it up in a nozzle, spray it out in little tiny lines, and just kind of build up, just like you would
like layer
with Legos.
by layer.
Kind of like a Lego. You're building a house from Lego. You don't start at the top and work down. You work from the bottom up, right?
I always use like the log cabin analogy in my head, where like you're putting one log down. That's your line that you're putting down. You're melting out.
Yep.
And then you change direction, lay down another line. You keep doing that, and eventually you have a square house.
Yep. But it always does every horizontal layer one at a time, whether it's 0.2, 0.4, 0.6, depending on how much detail you want. You can get them down pretty nice on the newest models of printers. They can get down to, I think, even 0.1 now. Not 0.01 like a resin printer, but 0.1 on an FDM printer is pretty good. And I imagine there's probably technology that even does it better.
Yeah, and I've seen some of the FDM printers, like FDM prints you've done for larger models. And oh my god, the detail's insane.
Yeah,
you don't even realize that like if someone had told you it was injection molded, unless you're going over it with like a magnifying glass, you might not even know.
Yeah, no, right, exactly. And that goes on to another subject we'll talk about after this. But we're talking about the basics right now.
How they work.
Yep. And then we'll talk about the model makers and designing. But so yeah, that's in a nutshell. It's just literally you're building a layer after layer after layer, kind of like building a cake. You just build it up, and then you get a model, and it's pretty cool. Like, and you got to think of it a different way. You're not like go ahead. I mean, resin printers are different.
Yeah,
they work differently.
Yeah,
but in the same way.
You've had almost no luck with the resin printers.
I mean, I did a couple prints that turned out really well, but there's so much more, like, with an FDM printer, even if you mess up on, like, how well you do the bottom layers or the sidewalls, it doesn't really matter, because once it's past that layer, you won't even really notice it anyway. Mm-hmm. But on a resin printer, if you mess up them first layers...
Yeah, then the whole thing's off.
Yeah, and then for me, it's just like, I already learned one printer, I don't want to learn it opposite.
Yeah. So and speaking of the opposite, so the way a resin printer works is you take a UV cure resin. What this means is if you shine UV light on it, that resin will harden. That's what you're typically using.
Yep.
Now what you do is you have a TV screen separated from the resin by a little sheet of plastic. There's a bowl basically that the resin sits in. It's called a vat. And this TV screen will put like the letter I in UV light, and all of a sudden you'll have a letter I, like a layer of that in the resin.
It's hardened, yep.
It's hardened. And then a build plate comes down before it hardens, and it will attach itself to this very porous, grippy, kind of burnished almost aluminum.
Yep.
And they could be different materials and stuff.
But aluminum's a popular one, though.
Typically, aluminum's what we see. It hardens it to this plate. The plate will then raise up 0.03 millimeters, and then the next layer will harden and cure and be attached.
Yep.
And resin is definitely a bigger monster in that, like, the amount of leeway you have,
it's really unforgiving.
Is very unforgiving. like so when you're working at 0.1 millimeters, like, so what do you said even that's tiny, right?
Yeah, that's really small for an FDM printer.
So if we look at it,
I generally print at 0.4, 0.2 if I really want to get down there.
I print at 0.03.
Yeah.
Which is tiny.
That's
compared to
0.4. Yeah, that's a whole decimal place.
Yeah, it's
that's a big difference.
About 12 times.
That's like the difference between a foot and a yard.
Yeah,
it's a big difference.
Or a meter and a meter and a decameter.
There you go. Yeah, we'll go with let's just stick with inches and feet and yards.
Yeah,
we're imperial system here.
Stick to what we know.
Although funny you speak of that, because all of the software wants to work in millimeters.
Yeah, I typically work in millimeters. Working in a machine shop, I had to. So. Right. We also worked with inches too. Some people want inches, some people want millimeters.
Because you worked at a machine shop. I worked at a factory, another factory down the road, and we worked at everything was in inches and fractions. Mm-hmm. So I learned everything from glass cutting to wood cutting. Everything was down to the 64th of an inch. We didn't talk no millimeters, no nothing. Yep. If I had said millimeters, everybody looked at me like I was a freaking.
No, I worked in a machine shop in North Dakota that was half of the stuff we did was in millimeters, half of the stuff we did was in inches.
What the heck?
And it all depended upon the supplier and who was buying.
Wow, I suppose.
I digress. So the idea is like resin. I guess we'll segue forward.
Yep.
I want to start with this statement. Resin will typically give you better quality prints.
Right.
But working with it is probably 4 to 5 times as difficult.
Yeah, it's miserable.
It's requires a lot of setup,
Right.
a lot of taking precautions. I tell people if you want to get into 3D printing, do an FDM printer. Don't do a resin printer unless you know you're going to be serious about it.
Yeah, right, exactly.
And if you want, unfortunately, like if you want to do minis for like your tabletop game, like 28, 32 millimeter minis,
Right.
Especially if you're doing like if you want
Right.
good painter quality,
Yep.
you're going to want to do resin.
Yep.
But here's a checklist of things that you need to be worried about if you want resin. Do you have somewhere to vent it?
Yep.
That's the first thing I tell people. If you have nowhere to vent it, do not get a resin printer.
Yeah.
Because you don't want to breathe that stuff in.
I mean,
And you got to wash it in isopropyl alcohol,
nice
and if
and
you
fun.
breathe
It's
that
okay.
in, your
It's
lungs will hurt.
It's okay.
You can work with a respirator, but you got to remember that stuff's going to be in the air.
Yeah, it's in the whole house or the whole building that you're in.
So what I recommend if you do it and you say, "Oh, I don't want to breathe it in. What do I do?"
Right.
Find a ventilation system.
Yeah.
You can buy UV reflective tents
Yep.
on Amazon or whatever distributor.
Right.
And a lot of them come with a fan that you can hook up and put in your window.
Yeah,
and
just
blow
shove it out
outside.
the window. Yeah.
Because the trace amounts that you're putting outside aren't going to be as concentrated to affect the environment.
What happens when we blow it out the window? Do we make the frickin' frogs gay?
No.
Oh, okay. Sorry.
The other thing is space.
I tried to throw him off the hook. It didn't work.
You need space.
Yes.
And a single 4x8 fold-out table, you're going to be just crying for more space.
Yeah.
Because you need somewhere to wash the resin. You need somewhere to cure the resin. You need somewhere to store the actual printer itself.
Yep.
You need somewhere to store all the bottles and the empties and the miscuts and the
all the
misprints and all
stink.
this crap and
Yep.
all this stink. Go through a mental checklist. Like, play this over and over again and copy this down because
Right.
these things are going to be so important. The third thing, gloves.
Yeah.
Latex, nitrile, whatever you're not allergic to, buy obscene amounts of them because you're going to go through a lot. On the side of that, too, with PPE, get a respirator or get a mask. You could even just use like an N95 particle respirator.
Right.
That wouldn't hurt too bad. But I would highly recommend getting a sealed face respirator with basically a sealed respirator.
Right. I use the face mask, like the big shields, when I was doing it here. I mean, obviously it doesn't help with the breathing part, but it does keep it from splashing on you. Because the resin actually is not good for your skin either.
No, and that's why you want gloves.
Like it's an irritant for sure.
Yeah, and then you're going to be going through a lot of isopropyl alcohol, so you're dealing with now a flammable substance.
Yeah.
So if you're in an apartment or you're in whatever, you got to be very careful because it's flammable, and you could get the lower percentages, but
no, you don't really want to.
then it's not really cleaning it as well.
Yeah,
I don't think.
No, it takes more because you have to clean it more, and you have to go back a couple times. You use a 99% isopropyl. It does the job pretty good.
Yep, and then you have to be careful not to create any sparks or nothing like that. Like, it's a big deal deciding to get into resin printing, and I don't mean to scare anybody. I just want if you're listening to this thinking, should I get into printing?
Right.
If you want to do resin printing, make sure that you understand exactly what you need to get into it.
Yeah, I do it.
And
I would
read a
literally
lot.
just do it in an outbuilding if you can. If you have a garage, you have a shed that's heated or whatever, you can. Because again, we haven't even talked about that, but for both of the types of printing, you need to make sure that this heat's stable, no matter where you're at, whether you're resin or FDM. You got to keep the heat as stable as possible. Hence why a lot of them have hoods and covers. And
well, the nice thing about resin, it's to a certain. I mean, there's a certain like crossover,
right.
But to a certain point, the warmer the resin, the quicker it cures.
Oh, there you go. Yeah.
So like you can print, like if I up the degrees, if I say I went from printing at 70, so like probably 26 Celsius, if I bumped it up to 31 Celsius or maybe like 85 degrees, it would cure in maybe like 33% faster.
Right.
Like the rate at which it cures is so much quicker up to a certain point.
Right.
Also, I highly recommend once you do start, like experiment with different resins.
Yeah.
You know, buy little bottles of resins to start with.
Yeah.
And then just don't be afraid to realize that you're going to have tons of failed prints to start with.
yeah.
You're going to go through a lot of stuff that fails. So tell me now about FDMs.
Yeah. FDMs, way easier, way cheaper, cost effective, way better. Obviously, the only difference between the two is quality.
Level of detail. Quality, I'd say level of detail.
Yeah, for sure. Because I've printed everything from big things to little things to everything in between. I've even printed like large amounts of mobs for a person. So like if they're gonna have 50 zombies, it doesn't matter because you're not gonna go paint all 50 zombies, but you want the representation, right? So you just print out a pile of zombies or a pile of skeletons or whatever. And there's companies that are getting really good at designing the models for FDM printers. Like I've done dragons and stuff that look actually pretty cool, you know? But the cost between the two is huge because in a resin, once you get it dialed in, it's really not as bad because a 1 liter, I think it's 1 liter, right? The bottle's resin.
Kilograms.
Or 1 kilogram, sorry.
Yeah, I don't know why they sell them by weight, but it's effectively a liter.
Yeah, okay.
But also a kilogram.
Right.
Like, yeah.
Well, that's how FDM sell it by kilogram also. They sell them by 2.2 kilogram rolls.
Yep.
Or 2 kilogram rolls, but it's technically 2.2. Whatever. I don't know why they do
Probably
it that way.
Probably the tear weight of the actual spool.
Yeah, maybe. I don't know. But anyway, 1 spool of FDM is $20, usually less. You can probably get them for 15 now. Mm-hmm. 1 bottle of resin, and there is a quality difference. Now, yes, there are FDM. You can almost buy any FDM and make it work, any filament. You will get a little differences, but it's just literally dialing in your printer to deal with the nozzle and the heat. And you could, for the most part, there aren't any. I know people are going to be upset with this, but I've used everything from the $15 to the $30 rolls. And the difference was the $30 rolls have a better, they tell you exactly what you want the temperatures to be on your nozzle in the bed. The $15 roll doesn't tell you crap. Mm-hmm. And so you just go with your pre-settings. That's what I do. And it still prints. But with your resins, there's a huge market there because I know some of the cheaper resins are way more finicky than some of the nicer resins.
That's true.
Yeah, and I noticed that when I was doing it. And the few times I did it.
I can't speak a whole lot to that because I don't.
No, you bought the nice one right away.
I found resin that I liked right away.
Yeah, you found. I have bought multiple brands, and one of my brands worked really well for my printer. The other one I couldn't get to print for crap. But anyway, I'm going to go back to FDM here because that's what I'm doing. The cost of a model, a standard mini, would be less than probably 5 cents a mini. That's literally printing a 28 to 52 millimeter mini.
That's about what it is for resin as well.
Right.
Actually, probably even cheaper, to tell you the truth.
Right. Where the cost difference gets into play, though, unless you want to mess with hollowing and all this other stuff, is I can print a whole arena for material cost so I used 2 rolls of resin for that arena. That was $40 material cost. Now, there is a time cost. Mm-hmm. My printer took about a week and a half to print all that, where a resin printer could have probably done that in 2 days.
Yeah, and
because it's a way quicker method.
And just to talk a little bit on this, if you're gonna do bigger things, I do think that the FDM is the way to go because you will save money.
Oh yeah,
that way.
You won't save time, but you'll save money.
However, I think printing smaller stuff because of the rate of failures of printing tiny stuff on FDMs, I actually think you'd be better off going resin. Like a great example of this is I printed 28 millimeter soldiers
right
for a nondescript tabletop war game of some renown.
Something to do with 4,000
because
zeros
because it was cheaper and they didn't have what I wanted.
Right.
So I'm like, all right, well, I'm not playing official tournaments. We just play casually, whatever. Plus, I kind of just like painting them and collecting them. So I'm just gonna print off this thing. So I bought some STLs. Found really nice STLs, like with the pickle helms and like the long trench coats. I'm like, oh, these guys look awesome.
Right.
I printed off 60 of those guys.
Yep.
And it cost me maybe like $8 or $9 of resin.
Right.
And then maybe like $5 of isopropyl.
But it did cost you your lungs for a few days.
That's my own fault, though. That one was my own fault.
I know.
And see, like this is why I'm.
Or the FDM printer, you don't. It doesn't matter. Like people say you should, but like, literally, FDM printing filament is literally a food grade plastic that is made out of cornstarch. That's literally what it is.
So with the printer, it was actually the cleaning that screwed me up.
The cleaning.
It was the isopropyl.
Yeah, it is. It's pretty.
I have always kind of been sensitive to solvents, anyways,
Right.
and so like just straight up breathing in isopropyl without a respirator.
Right.
On. That was my own fault.
Yeah, no, I was just being funny. It just, there's pros and cons for both, and it, like, I just wouldn't be scared to do. I would definitely start with FDM if you're gonna print anything. Like, don't be afraid to start with FDM. There's a lot less. It's cheaper to fail. Mm-hmm. 2, it's not nearly as frustrating to fail because
it's not gross and you don't have to clean it out and
right, but you're generally the only downfall would be is if you don't have to clean them. There's no fat film, so your fat film never leaks into your thing and goes all over your screen and tries to ruin your printer. Kind of like when you got it from Gamer Joe.
Yeah,
not you, Gamer Joe. The other Gamer Joe.
I had to basically rebuild a printer from scratch and replace the screen and
because
stuff.
the resin just got everywhere. Yeah. FDM doesn't do that.
Yeah.
The worst FDM do is cause a rat nest, and if you print it with FDM, you know what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
Like if a print fails, all of a sudden you just have a ball of filament just piling up. If you catch it, you do it. If not, it's like $2 mistake.
Yeah,
okay,
and don't get me wrong. Like, I also don't want people to be scared of resin printing. If you have the space and you have the precautions, and you're the kind of person that like, okay, let's put it this way: if you're the kind of person that wants to read a manual and set everything out, and then like put it together piece by piece using the manual, if that's your mindset, by all means go for resin printing. If you're willing to take all the precautions and go slow and have the patience and just realize that like you're gonna have to learn some things as you go.
Right.
But on the other hand, if you're just one of those people that wants to get in, get dirty, and just slap stuff together, start doing it, FDM's your way to go.
Yeah. Another terminology that I like to think of is, okay, if you're a woodworker, you literally start out with hand tools because any woodworker should know this. You start off with handsaw. You start off with a hand drill. Like I learned when I was a kid, that's what we start off with. I didn't get the power tool right away. I didn't get the table saw or the router saw or any of that other stuff, you know. A router, not a saw, but a router. Yeah. And so you learn how to do stuff really basic. And I'm not saying there's other types of printers, by the way, just so you know. We're not excluding those. We just don't use them because one, they're really cost prohibitive right now.
And we don't know anything.
Yeah, we don't know nothing about them. So, but you start off with the basic tools, and I like to think that FDM printing is the basic tools. You can get advanced, but it's just that's the easiest, simplest way. Resin printing is absolutely wonderful. I love painting resin minis. It's absolute charm, and painting FDM minis sometimes is a pain unless you prime it real well.
Yeah, you've been enjoying the heck out of those resin prints lately.
Yeah. Well, they're just easy to paint,
and they're gorgeous.
Right.
Like you want to talk about detail quality? Oh my god!
And so we should move on to that.
Should we talk about the detail quality?
Well, we could talk about how do we get to that point? Like what does the process is?
So
like?
I guess maybe I'll just talk about my personal printing journey. Mm-hmm. Hi, I'm Javan. And this is my story.
And he probably ever will own one resin printer.
I own, so...
Because he won't get into it deep. He just like, no, one is good enough.
A buddy of mine was like, hey, I got a printer. It's not working great. It's also cold out in my garage, so I can't use it. And I said, well, I literally have a ventilation, system and all this.
That I use for painting.
I use for painting. And so he lent me his printer, and I'm like... oh man, this is all messed up. So I talked to the wizard, a buddy of mine who commercially prints resin and filament.
Right.
Him and a buddy of mine started up their own company. Shout out, DigiPrint.
There you go.
They make bezels for fighting game hitboxes.
Nice.
Like these hitboxes that had discontinued bezels and stuff. They print them. And then they also make their own hitboxes. But yeah, so like he's super smart guy.
Right.
Like he's the kind of guy that like does circuit board work and like builds his own circuit boards and stuff. Stupid smart. And he's like, okay, here's
what was his name?
He goes by Naked Egg Salad.
Okay.
That's his.
It's not the one that's named after a famous martial artist, is it?
So they're partnered together.
Okay, of course they are. See, we can call him out. We'll just get extra views.
Actually, you've met the one, Blood RS. He did the podcasts on fighting games with us.
Right.
Anyways, I digress. So I go to Naked Egg Salad, and I'm like, hey, bro, teach me. I'm here to learn. I'm literally thrown in the deep end with a resin printer that isn't working right.
Yep.
After much troubleshooting, I ordered some parts. Got it working. Start my first prints. Holy crap, it's working. Oh my god, excitement.exe.
Yep. Yep.
Getting super excited. It's like that emoji or that gif of Chris Pratt in Parks and Recreation when he's like, looking at the... Yeah, I was so excited. And so I start printing off like 28 millimeter minis, 32 millimeter minis, even some bigger stuff, and just like go all through the frickin'...
Right.
I mean, I printed a lot of frickin' stuff.
Yep.
A lot. And it let me dial in over time too. I learned like where I could cut corners, where I couldn't cut corners. I learned how to hollow.
Yep.
For bigger stuff like printing like a tank or something. Because you don't want to print a solid brick of resin. First off, it's so heavy. Second off, it's actually bad for the longevity because it might explode one day.
Yeah, because the inside might not dry all the way and it starts frickin' whatever it does in there.
Yeah, and so I did make sure that I had a curing station, like an auto curing and an auto cleaning station. And oh my god, just do that. Like buy one and just spend the money. It's so worth it. Consider it as part of the cost of your printer.
Right.
Yeah, so I started printing minis, and I basically printed everything I wanted. So now I'm printing for other people. And I went from having, like, pretty cool detail with, like, a little bit of lines in it because I was printing, like, 0.04, 0.05.
Right.
Now I print basically everything at 0.03. It takes a little longer, but, like, the one mini I printed, like, it was the T-shirt.
Yep.
You could see the stitches on the plaid of the T-shirt.
Yeah, that
like
was
it was
cool.
detailed, and it wasn't like oatly stand out. But
that
it was
was
like,
the Leah model, right?
Yeah, it was from Stardew. It was Leah from Stardew.
It's really cool.
But like in the floorboards, you could see the wood grain and everything. And I printed it at I think I printed it at 70 millimeters.
Yep, it was a pretty big one.
So I scaled it down, and the detail was still just insane. And
it's a good model.
The monitor I have is technically an 8K, I think.
Yep.
But I've never rendered anything like that before.
Right.
But yeah, so that's my journey and like getting everything dialed in.
But I want to make one note in there. I will never ever feel sorry for you that it took an hour longer to print. Because
why?
Because that mini, even Leah model mini, if I had to print it on FDM, would probably take 15 hours. And the quality would not be anywhere near that.
Nowhere near it, right?
So I don't want to hear about that. My prints, if I printed high quality and it's a decent sized print, it's going to take me 70 hours.
Well, I think...
Now, obviously, there's printers that are faster and better than what I've bought already at this point. But even if you cut that in half, 35 hours, you're like, I could start in the morning and by evening I could pull it off and clean it.
Printed by
right? Like, come on, man. Like, you're like, oh, it just takes so much long. It took an hour longer. Like, I know you weren't saying it that way, but I can hear people like in the audience going, an hour long. Like, dude, no, shut up.
Yeah, no.
You crank the FDM level up 1, you multiply it by 2 at the time.
No, it is important to talk about, and like ultimately, it's like the difference between like you to make one layer for an FDM, you got to realize you have to melt plastic.
Yeah.
And stretch it the whole way around your print.
Yep.
Whereas with a resin printer, you build the whole layer at one time.
Yeah, it's all one shot.
Instantaneous at one time, and then the next layer, and then the next layer.
I will mention one other thing that's kind of it is kind of important to an extent, because even if I could do this, I wouldn't. And this would be like at home. I have printed headphone holders and USB cable holders and stuff. But I would not, and I've tried. So I have tried this because I did when I first got my resin printer. I did try to print out some USB cable holders, but resin tends to be a little more fragile than FDM. There's not a lot of forgiveness in it.
That's true. It's definitely brittle.
Yeah, like you wouldn't want to print a coat holder, and hang off a resin. It would just snap.
Yeah,
I do that. I got I got holders all over my house for stuff with my 3D print, my FDM printer.
So I will say, however, that they have come a long way.
Oh, yeah.
You can buy like ABS, yeah.
Yeah.
And I've never worked with it personally,
It's probably more toxic than even the resin stuff, though.
I don't know. They have water washable resin too, so like honestly, you could start with that, and then you don't have to worry about a lot of it. But I've never worked with it, so I can't speak to it. I've worked with the sick, nasty stuff to begin with.
Yep.
So let's move to the next logical step.
Yep.
STLs. Where do you get them?
Well, I've bought them. I've got them free.
Do you ever go on?
I've made them.
What was the one guy? Our gamer Joe. Where did he go and buy all his ones? It was Etsy. He went and bought repackaged STLs.
No, I did not do that. No. There's a lot of people doing it, and I've always been of course, I run a hobby store, and so for me, even aftermarket like reprint of like Magic cards and stuff, I don't buy the proxies. Sorry, Moxies. The Moxies. Yeah. I don't do proxies. People want to have proxies, fine, but I'm not going to sell them. I just find it's not what I do. But no, I don't like that practice. I will buy STLs if I find STLs I want. I've bought there's this whole company, ARS Morendi or whatever it's called. I bought all of his stuff, like $600-700 worth of his stuff. He's got like hundreds and hundreds of freaking STLs. I bought them all. And every time he puts new ones out, I just buy them because I know they're going to be good for my printer. I know they'll just print. Yeah. You know, even if I don't want them, like it's just
I think you hit on something important there too. Is like, so I've bought from several different websites now.
Right.
I usually try to go to like marketplace websites, and that way I can see like all the people that sell them.
Yep.
And I have found that it's nicer to buy like a test model, like let's say, like I buy a Knight on a Horse from this person.
Right.
If that model prints well, and there's no clashes in the STLs, and I don't have to do a ton of work in the slicer,
right.
Guess what? I'm gonna go back and buy more models from that person.
Yeah, I literally try to buy models with no. I mean, because so there's another difference. I guess we didn't cover that either, but supports. I buy it. No STLs that require supports for the FDM printer. It gets to be adds exponential amount of time to print. Everything you add to an FDM printer adds hours on time. And if you print 50 supports, you're adding 50 hours essentially onto your print time.
Yeah, and it's exactly the inverse.
Yeah, so I always look for no support models. And yes, sometimes I don't get to have the fanciest ones and whatever, but I'm okay with that because I'm not always looking for the fanciest ones.
You can even go into your slicer, which we haven't talked about at all.
No, I don't think we need to do that. That's just kind of its own
it's
complicated still beast.
It's literally part of the 3D printing hobby, though, is your slicer.
That's true.
Like if you don't know how to run a slicer, it's like having a car without a steering wheel.
I think so short slicer for me, because I don't want to talk about it a lot, is that if you buy a 3D printer from a company, use the slicer they recommend, and just learn it. Yep.
Weird. Because
I used Creality slicer, which they use another company and they just add their own flavor to it. And then L.A.G.S, my L.A.G.S printer that I have, I use Ultimaker from Kira because that's what L.A.G.S tells you to use. And it just works that way. I've never had any issues with slicers.
And see, I've only ever used what my buddy told me to use. He's like, use L.A.G.S. He's like, just use it.
Right.
And I learned that one, and I can use it. I've used it for every printer.
Yeah. Well, I've
even done some like support stuff for
that
people.
That would be the difference between your resin and your not. L.A.G.S is definitely it gives you a lot more control. Not that the Ultimaker doesn't give you the control, because it does. It's literally the company that basically started the whole, the Kira Ultimaker. Kira was one of the first companies that, at least in my knowledge, that had a multi-printer usage. Like,
oh, I see what you're saying. Yeah.
Like a lot of companies, like even Creality takes their stuff.
Proprietary software.
No, right, yeah. Even Creality takes their software from them and then just adds their own stuff to it. So that's why I use that. But I've just found that I don't like working in the deep details because I don't need to with my FDM printers. I really haven't needed to ever. The only time I've had to do it is when my FDM accelerometer was having an issue. And so I just fixed that problem and it was over with. And I did have an issue where the low level thing was going wonky, and I fixed that too. But I just don't deal with that. It is something that you need to think about if you want to get into it deep. But I think that all my prints, for the most part, come out really nice because I bought nice printers from the beginning. And I did. I'm not saying I haven't had any problems, because I have, but I don't think that you need to go off and find the most. Like L.A.G.S is definitely a third-party software, because I don't think anybody manufactures L.A.G.S. I think it's a community-driven project, if I'm not wrong.
I've never looked into it. All I know is I used it.
It's good.
I love it.
Yeah, a lot of people love it and use it.
It works in FDM and resin.
So does Kira.
Yeah,
Kira's the same way. It's Ultimate.
Also, like, don't be afraid to just shop around and check the there's nothing wrong with using what they recommend. I will say that, like you just said, there's nothing wrong with that.
Right.
I've done a lot of recording and audio stuff over the years, and a lot of times I just use the recommended drivers and all stuff like that. Nothing wrong with that.
Right.
But if you are the person that wants to tinker and play with stuff, don't be afraid to try out some of the other ones.
Right. No, of course not. Do it, but just to get out there and do it, just do it, and then go from there. Like it's like any other hobby. You don't go out and buy if I promise you, and I've seen people do this. I'm gonna work on my car, so go out and get the car lift and buy all the $10,000 for tools and not know how to use any of it.
Yeah. No,
what do I do with my $50,000 worth of shop and I don't know anything about working on a car? It's like, what?
Do we want to recommend any brands, or just kind of like let people shop around themselves?
No, I would. There's brands I definitely would recommend.
Because I know for me, the only one I've worked with is L.A.G.S.
Right.
And I've had nothing but success with it.
I work with L.A.G.S also.
And their prices are super reasonable.
Yeah.
I went and looked and priced stuff out.
They are.
I've almost considered buying a second one, but I don't run the first one enough to.
Yeah,
really
I've definitely close to buying a second FDM printer because the newer ones are faster.
Yeah.
And now
my generation.
My 30-hour print is 15 hours. So I kind of like that.
But that's also like like we said earlier, you went in.
Yeah, years and years ago. Yeah, it was a long time ago.
And you know how tech explodes in 5 years. So,
oh yeah,
especially in a frontier field like 3D printing.
Well, for an example, my first printer, its suggested speed is 100 millimeters a second. I think it's 100 millimeters a second. So that's not very far as it turns out, right? The newest printers, I believe, are 750 millimeters a second.
So 7.5 times faster.
Which is, that's ridiculous. And the quality is better.
Wow.
So
what you could print in 7.5 minutes, you can now print in 1 minute.
Yeah, it's ridiculous.
That's wild.
It is wild. And it's crazy. I've been so close. But I'm just like, I want to wait until it kind of caps out. Like, most of my printing, I just print and go to bed. And then tomorrow morning, it might be done.
Time isn't too much of a factor.
No.
Unless you're printing something huge.
Right, yeah. Like I printed the Reno. I had to have it done in a certain time because that's what I said I was going to do. So I was on it. But so as far as that goes, do I recommend L.A.G.S? I did used to be a Creality guy, and I still think their products are good.
My buddy Nick at
I ran across bad tech support.
I think he uses Creality as well, and I think they're are they a Chinese-owned company?
I don't know. I'm not 100%
I can't
sure.
remember.
They're definitely Asian. I'm not sure if it's Chinese or not, but
I've also heard only ever good things about Anycubic for the most part.
Yeah.
But I can't speak to that from personal
my
experience.
first resin printer was Anycubic, and it ran fine initially.
Oh,
and then I broke it.
That's to get that thing going.
Yeah, and then I broke it somehow. So then whatever.
I gotta mess with that.
The other thing is budget-wise, L.A.G.S is probably, just from my experience and your experience, that's what we work off of. And the people I do know that have other printers, L.A.G.S has been easiest for me to use and the cheapest because I haven't had my L.A.G.S break yet. And there's a lot of parts you can get for nothing. And Creality was cheap too, don't get me wrong. But the tech support was horrid. Like the first time I had an accelerator problem, I dug through forums for days before I found one guy that knew anything about what I was talking about. And he's like, check this. He showed me a picture of a little tiny freaking screw, micro. It must have been maybe 1.5 millimeters across, maybe 2 millimeters. And you got to turn it just I can't use bad words, a hair over. Just not even a hair, like half of a hair. Because half a hair is like increasing it by tenfold. Oh, and so you're just blow on it,
It's a fraction of a turn.
Yeah, it's just such a micro amount. And so anyway, but with L.A.G.S, I've looked at that before I bought my L.A.G.S. I looked at their reviews and I've watched a lot of people online use them, and their support system is so good. I'm like, holy crud. If I wanted to know something, I just go to their website and go to their community forums or their Discord or whatever. And all the answers are there.
Honestly, one of the coolest things about it is when I had to replace that screen, I literally went onto the L.A.G.S website and they had some guy from L.A.G.S just take a video at multiple angles of how to replace the screen.
Yeah, it's just
and then
like
below it, they also had a freaking write-up.
Yep.
Of what to do.
Yeah, it's
I'm like,
it's
this
no-brainer.
Is brilliant.
Yeah,
like, I'll do this any day of the week.
I'm a total L.A.G.S fan now. I do know there's other companies that I've seen, and I know people that use their printers. Prusa obviously is one of the kings because they're one of the first people who mass manufactured printers. But they're a premium company. You're like, and Bamboo.
Also, there's
a new company.
There's an infinite amount of literature and video reviews out there.
Yeah, absolutely. Do your research.
Yeah, I think that's the big key, right? It's just do your research. Hopefully this gives you a primer so you kind of know what to look for.
Find some YouTubers.
Yeah.
Just listen to what they have to say.
Yep. But no, I'm glad we covered this. This has been a long time coming.
Yeah, the other thing I want to talk about, we were talking about SDLs. You purchase them, which we talked about. I've actually found that making my own STLs isn't that hard. It's just a matter of wrapping your head around. Like, you can go out and take any kind of CAD program and make an STL. Now, the problem gets to be is when you jump into a CAD program and you say, oh, well, this is a $200 CAD program. I'm going to buy that and I'm going to download it or whatever, even if you get the free ones. Lots of times the learning curve on a regular CAD program is ridiculous. Mm-hmm. Like, it's just straight up and then right down off the cliff. Like, it's just rough. But I found a program online called TinyCAD. It's a web-based, you can download it too, it had a download function. But all it does is take geometry and I think you just take shapes. And
it's just
you mesh shapes together.
It uses
make
Euclidean
something.
geometry.
Yeah, and it's just like somehow my brain wrapped around how that works, and I don't know how.
Yeah, you don't. Well, the thing is, you don't need to know any topology or math.
I didn't need to know how to design little spikes. I could just literally take the cone, shape it to what I want, take another cone, shape it, and then hollow it out. And it was done. Like bam. I'm like, oh my gosh.
Okay, so I think it uses from what I'm gathering, it probably just uses simple Euclidean geometry.
I think there's like 30 shapes you can choose from, and you just start meshing them together. You can hollow them out, make them bigger, smaller, flatten them, whatever you want to do with them.
I believe actually super simple. Microsoft has, like, in Windows.
Yeah, they have something similar.
3D Paint.
Yep, they do have something similar.
3D Paint.
I just found TinyCAD just worked out easy. Yeah,
it's like crazy.
And I've used it before when I was doing STLs for my I was using STLs for my Final Cutter.
Oh yeah,
because you could just design the 3D thing in there, and then you could see where you need to cut out for what this is and what that is. Right. And then you just set them on your
cutter.
Helps you
kind of translate everything.
Yeah, well, then you can cut the layers out and see you design it in 3D. So when you go to lay it on your sign or your stuff, you know how everything's going to lay out.
Yeah.
I mean, you can do it in any program, but it's free on Microsoft. So, like, I got rid of Adobe because I didn't need it.
Yeah. Yeah,
like,
you used Adobe for a long time.
I did. I like Adobe, but I just don't find myself doing a lot of graphic design anymore. And 3D Paint was just enough
for it. Just if you're not using it, yeah.
Yeah, I don't want to pay $20 a month just for something to sit there. Mm-hmm. So,
all right. Well, this has been a fairly extensive episode.
Yeah.
I hope this answers some questions people had about 3D printing and maybe how to get into the hobby.
Yep.
I can't think of anything else to add.
I don't either. I think we're good.
All righty. Well, catch you on the next one.
Later.